The housing crisis. Who's really buying all the homes? A burning balance sheets documentary. There was a time when buying a home felt normal, not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. A regular job, a decent income, a few years of saving, maybe a mortgage that felt intimidating at first, but manageable over time. For generations, home ownership wasn't just a financial goal. It was the foundation of stability. A place to raise children, a place to retire, a place that belonged to you. For many families, a house was the biggest purchase they would ever make, but it was still a home first, an investment second. Today, that order feels reversed. Because across much of the developed world, homes have become something else, assets. And when homes become assets, everything changes. Prices, politics, communities, families, even the future. And somewhere in the middle of this transformation, millions of people started asking the same question. Who's actually buying all the homes? Because something feels broken. People are working. People are saving. People are earning more money than previous generations, in raw dollar terms. Yet many feel further away from ownership than ever before. In Australia, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and many parts of Europe, the housing conversation has shifted from aspiration to frustration. Young adults stay with parents longer. Families delay children. Renters spend larger portions of income just to stay housed. First home buyers compete against investors, developers, cash buyers, and rising prices. And every year, the finish line seems to move further away. The housing crisis is no longer just an economic issue. It is becoming a social one, a political one, a generational one. And the deeper you look into it, the more complicated the answer becomes. Because despite what social media often suggests, there is no single villain, no secret room filled with billionaires buying every house in sight. The truth is more unsettling. The housing crisis is not being created by one force. It is being created by multiple systems colliding at the same time. And together, they are transforming housing from shelter into one of the most valuable investment assets on Earth. To understand how we got here, we need to go back. After World War II, many Western nations experienced an enormous housing boom. Governments encouraged ownership. Land was more available. Construction surged. Suburbs expanded. Infrastructure followed. Homeownership became part of the social contract. Work hard, buy a home, build equity, retire with security. For decades, that model largely worked. In America, the suburban dream became part of national identity. In Australia, the quarter-acre block became a symbol of success. Owning property wasn't simply about wealth, it was about belonging. But over time, something happened. Houses stopped being viewed primarily as places to live, and increasingly became financial instruments. Because once people realized housing prices generally rose over long periods, property began attracting more than homeowners. It attracted investors, and investors think differently. A homeowner asks, "Can I live here?" An investor asks, "Can this appreciate? Can it generate rent? Can it outperform other assets?" Those questions changed everything. Over decades, governments introduced policies that often encouraged property investment. Tax incentives, capital gains treatment, negative gearing in Australia, low interest rate environments, investment lending growth. These policies were often introduced for different reasons, but together, they helped turn housing into a wealth-building machine. And when an asset becomes a wealth-building machine, demand accelerates. Because people stop buying only one home, some buy 2, 3, 5, 10, and suddenly housing demand is no longer driven only by shelter, it is driven by investment. This distinction matters enormously. Because when demand comes from both people who need homes and people who want returns, prices can rise much faster, especially when supply cannot keep up. And supply has not kept up. In Australia, housing affordability continued deteriorating through 2025, with prices and rents reaching record highs, while new housing supply struggled to meet demand. Labor shortages, construction costs, and high interest rates all limited new development. The National Housing Supply and Affordability Council described the housing system as being under immense pressure and still firmly in the grip of a crisis decades in the making. That phrase matters, decades in the making. Because many people search for one event, one policy, one decision, one culprit. But housing crises rarely emerge overnight. They accumulate, year after year, government after government, boom after boom, until eventually the system becomes stretched. Then everyone notices at once. One of the most common beliefs is that giant corporations are buying every home. The reality is more nuanced. Institutional investors have absolutely become more active, particularly after the 2008 financial crisis. When millions of homes entered distress in the United States, large investors bought properties in bulk and converted many into rentals. That helped create an entirely new asset class, single-family rental portfolios. Wall Street discovered something powerful. People always need housing, and rent creates recurring cash flow. But while institutional ownership receives enormous attention, the numbers are often misunderstood. Research in 2026 found institutional investors owned roughly 0.35% of total U.S. housing stock and around 3% of single-family rental homes nationally. although their influence is much higher in certain metropolitan markets. That surprises many people, because it means the story is not simply BlackRock buying every house. The bigger story is that housing has become attractive to investors at every level. Small investors, medium investors, retirement investors, property funds, foreign capital, private equity, individual landlords. The investor class itself has expanded, and its impact is visible. Investor purchases accounted for around 30% of U.S. single-family home purchases in 2025, while some reports placed investor buying above 34% during parts of the year. Think about that. In some markets, roughly 1 out of every 3 homes sold was purchased by an investor. Not necessarily a giant corporation, but an investor. Someone buying for returns, not occupancy. That changes market dynamics dramatically, because investors and first home buyers operate differently. Investors often have existing equity, existing assets, existing financing advantages. They understand leverage. Many can move faster. And when prices rise, investors are often rewarded for already owning property. Meanwhile, first home buyers face higher entry barriers, larger deposits, higher repayments, stricter borrowing conditions. The latter becomes harder to reach, especially when wages fail to keep pace. In Australia, entry-level house prices reportedly increased around 68% between 2020 and 2025, while wages grew roughly 22% during the same period. That gap creates something dangerous: hopelessness, because people can tolerate hard work. What they struggle with is feeling like progress is impossible, and housing increasingly feels impossible to many younger households. The average homeownership dream has started to drift into the territory of inheritance, family assistance, or exceptional income. That perception alone changes behavior. People delay marriage, delay children, delay stability, delay life itself. And this is where housing stops being just an economic issue, because homes influence nearly everything: birth rates, consumer spending, wealth inequality, mental health, political trust. A society where ownership feels achievable behaves differently from a society where ownership feels unreachable. Then there is the supply side, one of the most misunderstood parts of the housing debate. Because regardless of who is buying homes, a simple reality remains: many countries are not building enough housing, not fast enough, not where people need it, not at the scale demand requires. Construction costs have risen. Land costs have risen. Approval processes remain slow. Labor shortages persist. Infrastructure planning often lags population growth. And every year, supply shortages compound. The result is predictable: more demand, not enough homes, higher prices, higher rents, more competition. Even when prices soften temporarily, affordability can remain poor because borrowing costs rise. In 2026, U.S. mortgage rates climbed above 6%, worsening affordability despite some market cooling. Australia experienced similar pressure through elevated interest rates, weaker borrowing power, and rising rents. This creates a strange paradox. People hear headlines saying prices are falling, then wonder why housing still feels impossible. Because affordability is not just about price, it is about monthly payments, income, financing costs, and availability. A $1 million house becoming a $950,000 house doesn't magically make it affordable if interest rates remain high. Then there is another force reshaping housing: short-term rentals. Platforms transform spare rooms and holiday homes into revenue streams. Again, the issue is not simple. Many owners use short-term rentals responsibly. Many rely on the income. But in high-demand areas, housing that once served residents can increasingly serve tourists. This reduces long-term rental supply in certain markets. And when supply falls, rents rise. The same economic pattern appears again. Demand increases, supply tightens, prices move upward. The crisis deepens. Yet perhaps the most important shift is psychological, because housing has become one of the dominant wealth engines of modern economies. For existing owners, rising prices often feel positive. Home equity grows, net worth rises, financial security improves. This creates a political dilemma. How do governments improve affordability without hurting homeowners? Because what helps buyers can sometimes threaten existing asset values. And when millions of voters already own property, change becomes complicated. This is why housing policy often feels trapped. Every solution creates winners and losers. Build more density? Some residents object. Reduce investor incentives? Some investors push back. Increase supply? Existing owners worry about prices. Restrict demand? Developers complain. Encourage construction? Infrastructure strains. There are no painless answers, only trade-offs. Meanwhile, housing continues absorbing enormous amounts of capital. And that creates another economic problem. When too much money flows into existing property, less money flows elsewhere. Into businesses, innovation, productivity, expansion. Housing is essential. But housing alone does not create the same economic output as industries that produce goods, services, or technology. When a society becomes excessively dependent on rising property values, growth can become distorted. Large portions of household income go toward mortgages or rent. Disposable income shrinks. Consumer spending weakens. The broader economy feels pressure. This is one reason housing debates have become so intense. Because housing affects far more than housing. It affects the entire economic system. And yet, despite all these pressures, demand continues. Why? Because housing remains emotionally powerful. People need shelter, families need stability, ownership still represents security, parents still want backyards, people still want something that belongs to them. That emotional demand never disappears, which means housing rarely behaves like ordinary assets. People will sacrifice heavily to secure it, work longer, commute further, take larger loans, accept higher stress. Housing sits at the intersection of finance and survival. That combination is explosive, and it explains why the crisis feels personal. Because it is. For some people, housing discussions are statistics. For others, they are daily reality. A renter facing another increase. A couple saving for years while prices rise faster. A family outbid repeatedly. A young worker wondering whether ownership is permanently out of reach. These stories are no longer rare. They are increasingly common, and that is why the housing crisis generates such emotional reactions. Because it touches identity, fairness, opportunity, the future. People want to believe effort leads somewhere. Housing is one of the most visible tests of that belief. So who is really buying all the homes? The uncomfortable answer is everyone. Investors, families, funds, landlords, developers, existing owners upgrading, foreign buyers in some markets, retirees, property groups. The real issue is not one buyer. It is a system where demand has expanded faster than supply for years, while housing became one of the world's most attractive investment vehicles. That combination pushes prices higher. Again, and again, and again. Until eventually an entire generation begins asking whether the game still works. The deeper truth is that housing has become a battleground between two competing ideas. The first says housing is shelter. The second says housing is an asset. Modern economies increasingly try to make it both. And that tension sits at the center of everything. Because when homes become investments, rising prices benefit owners. But when homes become too expensive, ownership becomes harder for everyone else. The system begins rewarding those already inside while raising barriers for those outside. That is how wealth gaps widen, quietly, over decades, one property cycle at a time. The housing crisis is not a conspiracy. It is something far more powerful, a collection of incentives. And incentives shape behavior. Governments respond to voters. Investors pursue returns. Developers pursue profit. Banks issue loans. Buyers chase security. Every participant behaves rationally. Yet the outcome can still become irrational. That is the frightening part. No single actor has to be evil. The system can produce imbalance on its own. And once imbalance becomes entrenched, reversing it becomes extraordinarily difficult. Because every solution threatens someone's interests. Meanwhile, time keeps moving, prices keep adjusting, rent keeps rising, deposits keep growing, and younger generations keep watching the gap widen. The next decade may determine whether housing remains a pathway to stability or becomes increasingly concentrated among those who already possess assets. Because once ownership becomes hereditary rather than achievable, societies begin to change. Trust changes. Mobility changes, opportunity changes, and eventually politics changes too. Housing has always been more than buildings. It is where people begin lives, raise families, build memories, create stability. The danger is what happens when the place people live becomes one of the world's most powerful financial products. Because financial products are designed to maximize value. Homes are supposed to maximize life. And somewhere along the way, those goals began pulling in different directions. That may be the real housing crisis. Not simply that homes became expensive, but that homes became investments first. And when investments outperform incomes for long enough, the dream that once felt ordinary begins to feel exclusive. The question now is whether future generations will inherit the same opportunity previous generations took for granted, or whether ownership itself is becoming the next luxury product. Because somewhere tonight, another family is scrolling through listings, doing the math, checking prices, calculating deposits, watching numbers climb, and wondering whether the home they want is still a home, or whether it became an asset long before they ever had a chance to buy it.